Back with another reading hour here. Just waiting for the Instagram to catch up. Let's see if we got the Instagram run up yet. All right, cool. Good morning, people. All right, back in with another reading hour here. So let's start right up again with the Gladio book. Let me just turn on my noise canceling here. Make sure I'm still getting some sound here. Testing. Okay, cool. All right, so picking back up with the Gladio book. So this is a section titled "New Vatican Friends." Jelly. So this is Licio Jelly. This is the mobster who's involved with the Vatican and the CIA. Jelly, after making the gold deposit, became a frequent guest at dinner parties hosted for Vatican dignitaries at the palatial home of Count Umberto Ortolani, the former head of military intelligence in Italy and Rome's most powerful layman. At these affairs, he befriended Cardinal Giacomo Lercaro, who became one of four moderators of the Second Vatican Council, Monsignor Agostino Casaroli, who would become the Vatican Secretary of State under John Paul II, Giulio Andreotti, the co-founder of the Catholic Democratic Party, Massimo Spada, and the lay delegato of the IOR, and Michele Sindona, Spada's financial assistant. At this time, Sindona, as previously noted, was the principal bagman for the Sicilian Mafia and the CIA. His duties included not only depositing drug money for the Genovese and other crime families in the IOR, that's the Vatican Bank, and parochial banks throughout Italy, but also conveying satchels of cash to prominent Catholic clerics, including Archbishop Montini. So Montini is again the guy who becomes Pope Paul VI later on. So the implication being that like even the papacy, like all the way up to in case like it's not clear that the Vatican is implicated in all these crimes, but like even to this day, you should assume that like all of these institutions are corrupt right up to the top and involved with some kind of three-letter agency in some kind of anti-communist operations because they historically always have been. Through Sindona, Jelly strengthened his ties not only to the IOR but also the Sicilian Mafia, including Luciano Leggio of the Vizzini family and Salvatore Rina of the Corleonesi clan. So pretty close to Corleone, but not quite. The Camorra of Naples and the Ndrangheta of Calabria. It's a weird word. It's apostrophe N Drangheta. So Ndrangheta of Calabria. Jelly provided to be of inestimable value by introducing Italy's leading men of respect to his old friends in South America, including Klaus Barbie. The scenario was now set for the development of the cocaine trade, an undertaking in which the CIA took a keen interest. So they're moving right on from heroin to cocaine. If you have one profitable product that you are getting your people addicted to, and then it also leads to another profitable, knock-on effect of the war on drugs and the for-profit prison system, why not add another product into the mix? Why not go straight from one to the other? So Operation Demagnetize. In 1956, Jelly returned from Argentina to his native Italy, where he opened a mattress factory in Pistoria and became a director of Permindex, a CIA front organization that was set up in Basel. Permindex, managed by CIA operative Frank Wisner, represented a branch of Gladio that provided arms to Imre Nagy and his rebel forces in communist Hungary. A funny name as well, Imrenagy. New Orleans businessman Clay Shaw, who was arrested and questioned in connection with the JFK assassination, was a member of the Permindex American Board. In Italy, Jelly served as the CIA's liaison to General Giovanni De Lorenzo, who, upon the recommendation of U.S. Ambassador Claire Booth Luce, had become the head of the Servizio Informazione Forze Armate, or CFAR, Italy's Armed Force Information Service. So I guess that's how they collect information on enemy units, or it's the information unit that is related to their military. Either way, CFAR was the clandestine agency that coordinated the activities of Gladio units throughout the country. With the appointment of General De Lorenzo came a directive from William Harvey, chief of CIA stationed in Rome, initiating Operation Demagnetize and authorizing CFAR to make use of all possible tactics, political, psychological, and paramilitary, to diminish the power of the Italian Communist Party. The directive represented an an authorization of the quote strategy of tension, which would get underway on October 27, 1962, with the assassination of Enrico Mattei, the founder of Italy's largest oil concern, ENI. I'm not going to bother with the Italian pronunciation of that one. So, yeah, and a lot of people have been talking about the American Years of Lead. I think it's kind of funny how short of a news cycle it already has been that some madman dressed up as law enforcement went around and assassinated some politicians, their dog, and then was like on the run for days before the cops actually got to him. And now this guy's obviously like a far right nut job that was radicalized by like Alex Jones and stuff, and then went out and attacked these Democrats. And then of course Republicans are tweeting this guy's image saying this is what happens when Marxists don't get what they want. It's wild stuff. Like you are living through the American version of the Years of Lead, which is like they've radicalized these people to the right with various media run by the state or paid by like used like in clandestine operations. Like if you don't think that these far right grifters are state ops to turn the country fascist, you're not picking up on the patterns here. So back to the book. Such attacks, Jelly later told BBC correspondent Alan Frankovich, were conducted in accordance with U.S. Army Field Manual 3031B, which outlined the new tactics to be employed by the Gladio units. Interesting. So if anyone wants to Google U.S. Army Field Manual 30-31B, uh, probably some interesting reading. If anybody wants to send me a link, maybe we can add that to the reading list sometime. So, going on, Shipless. Good morning. So this next section here is called Piano Solo. On Election Day in April 1963, the CIA nightmare materialized. The Communists gained strength, amassing 25% of the vote, while all the other parties lost seats, and Prime Minister Aldo Moro of the Christian Democratic Party, in an effort to assuage the growing number of leftists in his government, named socialists to cabinet posts. But the Communists were not pacified by Moro's appointments. They too wanted key government positions. In May 1963, the large union of construction workers, under the influence of the PCI, held a demonstration in Rome. The CIA became alarmed, and members of Gladio, disguised as police, smashed the rally, leaving more than 200 demonstrators injured. And just, for the audio listeners here, this is footnoted. That's footnote 22. Like almost every sentence of this book, at least all the ones that describe an actual event like that, have a footnote. And then there's like the whole index at the back. So all of these documents are linked in the show notes. If you find it on the YouTube, um, when this starts showing up in the podcast catcher, those links should also be in the show notes. So just look for the footnotes if you want any sources on this stuff. So CFAR now sought means to install a government of, quote, public safety consisting of right-wing Christian Democrats, top political managers, and high-ranking military officials. General De Lorenzo, together with 20 other senior army officers, drafted the plan for a silent coup d'etat in close cooperation with CIA secret warfare expert Vernon Walters, William Harvey, chief of the CIA stationed in Rome, and Colonel Renzo Rocca, director of the Gladio units within the military secret service. So, and again, like we have the names of all these people. Like I guess because it's so many decades later, this is all just like open information. But the whole point of this is to get you to understand that like this is still how these organizations operate. So please don't dismiss the materialist when they start telling you how these things are actually going on in the present day. To implement the coup, CFAR recruited 4,000 agent provocateurs to work with Rocca and his Gladio army. The recruits came to include members of the mafia, Italian street gangs, and neo-fascist organizations such as Movimento Sociale Italiano, or MSI, Italian Social Movement, also Ordine Nuovo, the New Order, and Avanguardia Nazionale, National Vanguard. See, that's the whole fucking thing that's so frustrating too, is that the right has completely stolen the tactics of the Leninists. Like, they'll admit it too. Like, they will admit that they admire Lenin for his revolutionary tactics, or even Mao or whoever. Like, they read this stuff and they have taken on the vanguardist tactics. Now, of course, they've also been aided and abetted in every way and at every step by the right wing state, but they still took vanguardism. And it's not like they even pirated it in the way that, like, you copy someone's file and they still have it. No, like the left forgot it. The left forgot vanguardism, what that is and how to do it, while the right took it on wholeheartedly. And that's the world you're living in the West. They were trained at a Gladio base near Capo Mararju, which was which was accessible only by helicopter. Hmm. If you want to look that up, it's Marargiu, Mararju, Capo Mararju. Upon completion of the training in terrorism and sabotage, they were provided with weapons and explosives. Piano Solo was to have concluded with the assassination of Prime Minister Aldo Moro and the installation of a Christian Democrat, Cesar Merzagora, as Italy's new president. But the coup was called off at the final moment when a compromise was reached between the socialists and right wing Christian Democrats. Okay. But Aldo Moro does end up dying. Like, spoiler alert, that is what happens to Aldo Moro. He gets kidnapped by supposedly left wing militant like terrorists, and in the process of like trying to get him back, he is just killed. Um, and that is still to this day in doubt whether it was actually like left wingers responsible or if it was like quite literally Gladio ops disguised as left wingers to demonize the left. So this next section here, mysterious death. When news of the formation of a terrorist squad emerged in 1968, Colonel Rocco was found dead within his office in Rome of a gunshot wound to the head. His death was ruled a suicide despite the fact that Rocco's hands bore no trace that he had fired a weapon, and the bloodstains indicated that he must have been lying flat on the floor while pulling the trigger. Such findings prompted General Carlo Siglieri, the former head of the Carabinieri, to commission an investigation into CFAR. Hey, I'm Carlo Siglieri, head of the Carabinieri. Italian is very funny, man. On April 27th, 1969, General Siglieri was found dead on a dirt road outside Padua, the victim of a mysterious car accident. So that's what's happening here. It's like if you try to blow the whistle, like why did they kill Roca to begin with? I thought he was their guy. Like, did I miss something there about like because we just started reading about Colonel Roca a couple paragraphs ago, and then they've already killed him. So I don't. Maybe it's detailed later here. I'll just keep reading if they explain why they had to get rid of this guy. But the point being that if you even look into the mysterious death, then you have a mysterious death yourself. Like wild shit. On April 27th, 1969, General Siglieri was found dead on a dirt road outside Padua, the victim of a mysterious car accident. General Giorgio Maunis, who was to provide evidence to the commission, dropped dead on the streets of Rome on June 25th, 1969. His assistant, Colonel Remo Dotario, shot himself in the heart a month later. This is wild. This is a lot, dude. This is a lot of deaths. Like, there's so many of these. The 33rd degree. The compromise with the socialists was a setback and pointed to the necessity of creating a quote state within the state, an organization that could control the Italian government by money, murder, and mayhem. To accomplish this objective, Gelli, at the bidding of Vernon Walters and other CIA officials, underwent the initiation rite of Freemasonry and joined the Romagnosi Lodge in 1963. Almost overnight, he rose to the 33rd degree of membership, which permitted him to serve as the leader of a lodge. So it really is just about who you know, even in the Freemasonry, even in like the secret society, which is like the whole point of those anyway. At the start of 1964, Gelli was appointed secretary of P2 under Giordano Gambarini, another CIA contractor. Vatican insider Count Ortolani, mentioned above, and Giulio Andreotti, the leader of the Christian Democratic Party who would become Italy's prime minister. By the end of the year, Michele Sindona was inducted into the lodge in an elaborate ceremony held within a villa in Tuscany. Yeah, this is like the highest society in like the most elite places. The Grand Master by 1970, the section is called the Grand Master. By 1970, Gelli had emerged as P2's new worshipful master. Hell of a title. I love the Freemason titles too. They're all like oddly similar to like KKK titles. Probably not a coincidence. So he emerged as the P2's new worshipful master and became known by the code name Filippo. Yeah, Filippo. The lodge now received massive infusions of cash, estimated at $10 million per month, from the CIA's black funds. This money was used to purchase the weaponry and material necessary to mount terrorist attacks throughout Italy, Greece, Turkey, and South America. By 1969, Gelli's Lodge could boast of such members as Italy's Armed Forces Commander Giovanni Torrisi, Secret Service Chiefs Giuseppe Santovito and Giulio Grassini, Orazio Giannini, the head of Italy's financial police, Italy's chief surgeon Dr. Joseph Miscelli Crimi, General Vito Maselli of the SID. Is this going to be like another long paragraph of just Italian names? All right, I'm just not going to read all these paisans. In addition, the membership list contains the names of leading cabinet ministers, along with 30 generals, 8 admirals, and numerous newspaper editors, television executives, and top business executives. Gelli took special pride in the induction of Carmelo Spagnuolo to his secret society. Spagnuolo was the chief public defender in Milan and later the president of the Italian Supreme Court. This ensured that P2, despite its acts of terrorism, would have justice on its side. Within 10 years of Gelli's emergence as worshipful master, P2 had branches in Argentina, Venezuela, Paraguay, Bolivia, France, Portugal, Nicaragua, West Germany, and England. Of course, West Germany, not the East one, not the good one. Within the United States, its members and associates included not only leading figures from the Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families, but also such notable political figures as General Alexander Haig, President Nixon's chief of staff, and Henry Kissinger, President Nixon's Secretary of State. Of course. Like, literally the usual suspects. So I'm at 16 minutes for this one. I'm going to go for another few minutes. Schivel says, why the intelligentsia in all aspect are removed in the transition of social liberation. Yeah, I mean, they're literally a self-replicating class that will fight militantly and with like massive atrocities to protect their interests and their power. Because this next section here is inside the lodge. The lodge, as members of Italy's P2 Commission later described, was a pyramid with Gelli at the apex. But joined to the apex of this pyramid was another, inverted one, containing the people responsible for the overall strategy. These people passed their orders down to the lower pyramid through Gelli, whose sole function was to follow orders. Antonio Bellocchio, a P2 commissioner, said in 1984, quote, "It is a sad reflection on Italian political life that a man of Gelli's modest intellectual abilities, for all his shrewdness and cunning, should have wielded such influence." So he's not even like a particularly bright guy, but he follows orders very well. So during the week, Gelli conducted court in rooms 127, 128, and 129 of the Excelsior Hotel in Rome. So just like having all these official meetings in these hotel rooms. The rooms were interconnected so that dignitaries, petitioners, and lackeys could enter room 127, where sentries stood guard. Once cleared, they could proceed to room 128, where Gelli, flanked by P2 officials, sat behind a massive mahogany desk. Upon completion of their business, they exited past more guards in room 129. Now they got the whole setup here. Pretty cool. The next section here is gathering dirt. In preparation of Piano Solo, the CIA conducted massive surveillance of Italian political, religious, and business leaders in order to single out the communist sympathizers. Once the new military order was established, these sympathizers were to be rounded up and shipped off to concentration camps on the island of Sardinia. As a result of this surveillance, Gelli and General De Lorenzo compiled files on more than 157,000 people of prominence, including tapes and photographs that could be used for blackmail or simple coercion. It also kind of makes you wonder where the Mossad learned it from. Does it sound pretty familiar? Also, like the whole Epstein thing makes so much more sense and seems so very obvious when you understand like this is just a tried and true tactic. You get to these people through these like sexual blackmail stuff, you get dirt on them, you put them in those positions to like literally do sex crimes against minors, and then when they do it, you have all this blackmail material on them. And then when one of your guys gets caught, who's like the high scale operative of this, it's like, what else is he supposed to do but kill himself in prison? Like none of this is a mystery unless you're not a Marxist. So copies of these files, some of which were as thick as dictionaries, were sent to the Vatican and to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. Nude photos of John Paul II. No way. Hilarious. That's the section title here. As the new leader of P2, Gelli continued to amass telling documents not only on leftist officials, but also members of his lodge. When a recruit joined the order, he was obliged to demonstrate his loyalty by conveying to Gelli documents that would compromise not only himself and his family, but also other possible candidates. Wow, okay, so that was literally what they made you do. Like your loyalty was you had to give them stuff to compromise yourself that they could hold. You had to give them the blackmail material to join their club. I'm just saying, maybe learn from this, folks. Like, it's always wild to me that like when people do their mutual aid and everything and they're raising funds, it's like they're asking each other. Like you're literally just asking everyone else out of the goodness of their heart, the people who are already suffering themselves to like give up money, what little expendable income they have to like raise money for whatever cause, which is like that goes in one direction. It's like a positive, like what do you call it? Like happy-go-lucky hippie direction. The other direction is like an aggressive direction where you like blackmail people. Like imagine if you had actual dirt and material on the people who have money, like the people in power who have power and influence, and you were able to use that. That's like what a vanguard party would do. That would be in a different direction. It's like an antagonistic direction that doesn't harm your own group and your own class and actually harms the people that are actively harming you. And in the process, you use that to help other people. Like imagine if you started blackmailing the powerful people to then donate to your cause instead of asking your own friends and family or whoever, your own comrades. Like I'm probably at about 20 minutes. Yeah, I'm at 21 minutes here. So I'm going to bookmark this one. Uh, let's see. Oh, yeah. So when these potential candidates were confronted with the evidence of their misdeeds, they generally caved in and submitted to the initiation rite without a word of protest. So that makes me wonder, like, those two sentences seem contradictory. Uh, it's like, were they obliged to provide the documents themselves, or were they presented with them once they were applying? Because either one would make sense. Like, either one would say, like, you're going to be, if you want to join this order, you got to give us the stuff to blackmail you with, or we actually have all of it already because we literally control all the bureaus, all the departments, all the institutions. So I don't know. It's not quite clear, but maybe it's a little both. So I'm going to bookmark the Gladio book here. Now we'll switch over to Western Marxism. So let's see. We picked up, we were talking a bit about Sun Yat sen. So we have seen Sun Yat sen attribute to the October Revolution the merit of having risen up, quote, against inequality in defense of humanity. The inequality he referred to was global. During the Chinese Revolution, the demand for equality was constantly aimed at the humiliation suffered by the nation as a whole. Vibrant and recurring were the condemnations of the quote, unequal treaties colonialism imposed on China. These had to give way to quote, treaties based on equality. Also condemned was the exterritoriality that the United States, above all, forced on China, which granted the right to U.S. citizens and those converted to Christianity and westernized in that great Asian country to organize and act as a state within a state. In any case, the struggle to affirm on an international basis the principle of equality, mutual benefit, and mutual respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty was an essential aspect of the anti colonial revolution. Damn, it's almost like mutually beneficial win win trade deals as opposed to like trade at the barrel of a gun, is what China has been doing in Africa, and that the West has been insanely mad at them for however many decades it's been going on. It goes without saying that neither Mao Zedong nor Ho Chi Minh lost sight of the problem of building a society free of the social polarization that characterizes both the pre capitalist and the capitalist world. Hmm. I mean, it's funny because that's like uh, probably not the assumption of most Westerners. Like he just asserts, it goes without saying that neither Mao Zedong nor Ho Chi Minh lost sight of the problem of building a society free of the social polarization that characterizes both the pre capitalist and the capitalist world. When like again me editorializing here, most Westerners would probably think that's exactly what happened, is that like the revolutionary leaders became corrupt and that's why they failed somehow because they just don't look into this stuff. The fact remains that contrary to Europe, in Asia the communists hailed the October Revolution, taking from it the stimulus to liberate themselves from the frightful inequality that the more advanced countries or that capitalism and imperialism have brought to bear on the colonial peoples. So yeah, once again, the Eastern Marxists learn from other examples and then implement it, whereas the Western Marxists just keep trying to protest over and over again. So this is section 8, the blurred boundaries between Western Marxism and Eastern Marxism. I have distinguished between Western and Eastern Marxism, referring to Western Europe and Asia. But where should we place Soviet Russia? All of the members of the leadership group of the Bolshevik Revolution had, to varying degrees, taken up the lessons of Lenin on the centrality of the colonial question and all to varying degrees tried to spread the revolution throughout Europe and to bring about an upheaval, a radical change without historical precedent. And so, at least for a time in Russia, there seemed to be no trace of the bifurcation between the two Marxisms. This bifurcation took form over time, as the expectation that the arrival of a worldwide society characterized by the vanishing of the mercantile economy, of the state apparatus and of national borders, of a society that eliminates every source of conflict and disharmony, lost credibility. The more this exhilarating prospect faded, the more urgent the task of governing Russia, a country in the grip of historical backwardness and the devastations of the First World War and of civil war, such that the Bolshevik leaders were forced to face, through oscillations and contradictions, a learning process that had to happen rapidly given the perils of the internal and international situations. Yeah. And that's just to say, like, there is so much that we should take from the examples of the Eastern socialist projects that many people just, again, still refuse to learn. And I started off when I was posting back in, like, I don't know, 2018 with like a copy pasta I was using to explain that, like, the USSR transformed Russia into from like this agrarian feudal land. I was saying it on here before, probably last week, into this. It was like a feudal backwater, and they were able to start competing with the U.S. in the space race in one generation. That's how they industrialized this like group of nations, united them all, beat the Nazis. It's like it's beyond impressive, and it's wild that people still just like reduce it to some kind of dystopia uh, because they've just been propagandized that much. The case of Lenin is exemplary. For some time, while the revolution seemed to spread beyond the borders of Russia, he shared the illusions of the other Bolsheviks to the point of making a risky prediction. In the closing speech of the founding Congress of the International, March 6, 1919, quote, "The victory of the Communist Revolution is assured. The comrades present in this hall saw the founding of the First Soviet Republic. Now they see the founding of the Third, Communist International." Break for applause. And they will all see the founding of the World Federative Republic of Soviets. In the early days of October 1920, in a climate of lingering euphoria, Lenin reaffirmed, "The generation of people who are now at the age of 50 cannot expect to see a communist society. This generation will be gone before then. But the generation of those who are now 15 will see a communist society and will build the society. This generation should know that the entire purpose of their lives is to build a communist society." Man, it's, like, so sad when you think back. Another really sad thing is, like, if you ever read about Soviet time capsules, like, the things that they put in the ground and, like, left for people 100 years later, and they literally expected us to have, like, space colonization, but, like, equality, like, public, state-funded and run space colonies on every planet and be, like, exploring the universe, as well as, like, having equality on Earth to begin with, but sadly, the wrong side won the Cold War. Yeah. Schivel says, expecting change with the same actions, moronic. That is the Western left. And he also says it's the power of education and literacy. It's amazing what you can do as a society when you start educating your people and you just start building a productive base from the ground up that focuses on the workers, especially if it's directed by those workers. So continuing here, it didn't take long for the illusion of the arrival of a radically new world in the near future, under the banner of a total and definitive reconciliation, to vanish. 2.5 years later, in an important speech, quote, "Better fewer, but better," published in Pravda on March 4th, 1923, we hear a completely different tone. Quote, "Improving our state apparatus, we must strive to build up a state, create a republic that is really worthy of the name Soviet, socialist." It was a long term task that would require many, very many years, and to solve it, Soviet Russia must not hesitate to study the most advanced capitalist countries. Beyond the question of the state and the nation, a rethinking and a learning process also had to occur in the economy. Lenin had branded Taylorism, a scientific system, for squeezing sweat out of the wage slave, but after the October Revolution, he stressed that the Soviet power must know how to increase the productivity of labor, teaching the Russian worker, traditionally a bad worker, how to work better, and promoting the critical assimilation of the Taylor system and the more recent advances in capitalism. Yeah, so he's like literally doing Dengism, unfortunately. Um, I don't know if this is where the NEP comes in, but that's another thing I always hear people bring up when they start talking about like uh, when they think the Soviet Union abandoned socialism or when they think it took the wrong path into like reformism. But I'll continue here. The distinction between Western and Eastern Marxism was temporal in the Bolshevik leadership group. Before the turning point of 1917, many of them had lived in the West, and they had lived not like the Chinese communists, staying for a brief time in France or Germany to learn science and technology to bring back their homeland as soon as possible. Not a few among the future leaders of Soviet Russia had spent a considerable part of their lives in the West without any certainty of returning home, and remaining largely isolated in the countries where they had found refuge, but where they could not obtain work in government or administration, even at the most modest level. Even more than in the French Revolution, a group or class of abstract intellectuals was called upon, so to speak, from one day to the next, to transform themselves into a governing class. Beginning with the exemplary case of Lenin, we can understand the learning process through which the Bolshevik leaders had to pass. Before the conquest of power, they had tended to think of post-capitalist society as the total and immediate negation of the previous socio-political order. With the first experience of exercising power, the growing awareness that the revolutionary transformation would not be an instantaneous and painless creation ex nihilo, some Latin there, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but a complex and tormented alphabung, to use a central category of Hegelian philosophy, to simultaneously inherit the highest points of socio-political order that was being negated and overthrown. It goes without saying that not all achieved or were disposed to achieve at the same time, and in the same way, the learning process imposed on them by the objective situation. I think that's actually a really good point to internalize. Let me just say that again. It goes without saying that not all achieved or were disposed to achieve at the same time and in the same way the learning process imposed on them by the objective situation. I think that's also like what a lot of people attribute to like these revolutionary leaders and they say they got corrupted or whatever. Um, it's like if you actually intend to build a new society, part of that involves like having a government, at least for a time. Like you're not just going to create the ideal anarchist utopia or whatever, and then not get immediately invaded by other capitalist states and just rolled over. Um, so the fact that these people were able to adapt to the situation in this way is actually really impressive and laudable, and we shouldn't just like immediately toss them out because of it. Shows us the use of due process and proper diplomacy here in 1920 to 30s is what really shaped the community. Yeah. So back in the book here. In other words, as far as Soviet Russia is concerned, the border between Western Marxism and Eastern Marxism was of a temporal character on the one hand, and on the other, it ran through that very leadership group. The contradictions and conflicts that ended up tearing it apart prefigured in the final analysis the conflict between the two Marxisms. Trotsky, who saw the power achieved by the Bolsheviks as a trampoline to launch the revolution in the West, eminently represented Western Marxism. Accused by his antagonist of national and provincial sentiments, Stalin was instead the incarnation of Eastern Marxism. He never left Russia, and already between February and October 1917, he presented the proletarian revolution as a necessary instrument for building a new social order, but also for reaffirming Russian national independence, which was threatened by the Entente that wanted to force it to provide cannon fodder for the imperialist war, and which treated it like a country in quote Central Africa. It was the vague presentiment that, far from being able to quote export the revolution to the West, Soviet Russia would have to work to not become a colony or semi-colony of the more advanced capitalist West. Yeah, which is unfortunately what did happen when the Soviet Union collapsed. Russia became a semi-colony of the West, and it's only now that it's posing any kind of significant threat, and really only with the help of China and the BRIC system. It's like it wouldn't even be able to do that on its own. So, section 9 here. Let me just check how long I got here. Okay, so yeah, I'll go another like 6 minutes here on this book. Uh, so, section 9, the difficult reciprocal recognition between two struggles for recognition. Hmm. Okay. From the start, Western Marxism and Eastern Marxism tended to follow different paths. Nor were polemical motives lacking. Nor were polemical motives lacking. Sometimes directly, often indirectly. In accepting the ideology of U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, for whom the defeat of despotism represented primarily by Germany's Wilhelm II, would have smoothed the way for definitive peace. Bloch distanced himself from Lenin, whom he criticized for having treated the two war coalitions as the same, and for not taking seriously the democratic character of Great Britain and its allies. In the eyes of the German philosopher, the Russian Revolution, quote, evidently reveled in the sovereign skepticism that sees nothing but the interests of capital, and nothing else, and scolds the English over their protectorate in faraway Egypt. Hmm. Bloch rolled his eyes over the trifling colonial question. The greatest empire of all time was thereby absolved with the argument that it would be misleading to condemn it because of a single colony, indeed a single protectorate, and one that is far away from Europe and so not worthy of any particular attention. Yeah, isn't that amazing? Like the people who like make excuses for the West, for the Western Marxist cause, such as it exists, it's like that's what they do is they just write off imperialism, and they make it seem as if there are these competing imperialisms, and in doing so, it's like when people treat a cop and the person they're brutalizing as equal parties in that exchange. It's like you're totally leaving out the power imbalance there, and by doing so, you are being sympathetic to the oppressor. Uh, they're just like literally not being honest. The German philosopher gave not even a nod to the ferocious repression that gunned down the Irish people who had rebelled against the war and colonial domination just a little earlier. What a difference from Ho Chi Minh, who followed that revolt with impassioned attention, and for the national liberation of a people not in the faraway Middle East, but in Europe. More generally, if Bloch scolded Lenin for giving excessive importance to the colonial question, Ho Chi Minh in 1923 criticized Marx for the opposite reason. Quote, Marx built his doctrine on a certain philosophy of history. What history? That of Europe. But what is Europe? It is not humanity in its entirety. Damn. Calling Marx out on being a white boy. Hilarious. The minimizing of the colonial question is a direct form of Eurocentric chauvinism. For another thing, aside from the horrors of the carnage of war, officially unleashed on each side in the name of the defense of the fatherland, in large sectors of Western Marxism, an exalted and abstract internationalism spread that considered the national question transcended, that considered the national question transcended, and consequently to delegitimize the movements for national liberation of the colonized peoples. Hmm. Again, you're like making excuses and you're being sympathetic to the oppressor when you just wash away the power imbalances there. This was an indirect form of Eurocentric chauvinism. Mhm. It is against this tendency that Ho Chi Minh polemicized in his speech at the Congress of Tours in December 1920. Quote, Today, instead of contributing together with you to world revolution, I come here with deep sadness to speak as a member of the Socialist Party against the imperialists who have committed aberrant crimes on my native land. Tell him, Uncle Ho. The world revolution risked losing sight of the most modest yet most concrete task of political support for the people struggling to throw off colonial subjection and constitute themselves as independent national states. Bloch never tired of criticizing militarism. He criticized Marx for having directed his attack almost, quote, only against capitalism, rather than concentrating his fire on, quote, militarism, whose embodiment would be represented by Prussia. Again, Ho Chi Minh, whose argument was quite different, called attention to quote, colonialist militarism, which had unleashed in the colonies the hunt for quote, human material, for black or yellow meat, that the great capitalist powers arrogated to themselves the right to calmly immolate in a war for world hegemony. Damn, spitting fire here. Like that is literally what the colonists do. It's like they roam around in conquest, committing atrocities in search of more humans they can use for cannon fodder and literally for just human meat to do more conquest with. We see the Communist International launch a year after its founding, a call to become protagonists in the revolution, not only to the quote proletarians, but also the oppressed peoples of the entire world, and that expressed a clear awareness of the centrality of the colonial question. However, in 1924, on the occasion of the Fifth Congress of the Communist International, Ho Chi Minh still felt obligated to intervene in the debate with a brief but eloquent declaration that criticized the persistent underestimation of the colonial question. Quote, I feel that the comrades have not yet sufficiently grasped the idea that destiny of the proletariat of the whole world, or that the destiny of the proletariat of the whole world is closely tied to the destiny of the oppressed nations in the colonies. Uh, yeah, I'm at 40 minutes, but like quite literally, if you think about it in terms of like the Busy Workers Handbook to the Apocalypse that I just finished reading up or reading through, it's like if we take that seriously and we really believe that humanity itself is like inevitably destined for extinction due to climate change, that means that over the last 50 to 100 years, when humanity had the opportunity to learn the example of socialism and Marxism, undo the damage that capitalism was continuing to do, um, like the West literally failed to do that. Like the people in the West had the most ability and proximity to the people, like the levers of power, and the people who were quite literally dooming humanity to this fate, and they didn't do it. Like they had all the knowledge and the ability to do it, and it didn't happen. All right, so I'm going to bookmark this one here, and now I'll switch over to since I finished that other book. I'm going to start a new one, but I have a quick one here. I'm going to start, and I should be able to finish it in the next 5 to 10 minutes, I think. So here's this cool graphic of this. It's like this Russian drawing, and it's this capitalist imperialist person at this huge machine, like an old-fashioned computer that takes up a whole room. It's got all these buttons and levers that all have labels for tanks and weapons and everything on them, and all this Russian writing on there. So I'll start with the text here. On the issue of inclusion of Israel into the United States, a letter of confidence to the U.S. Congress. The Feuilleton, I don't know if that's like what the name for the artwork or what, but it appeared in Crocodile, issue number 20 of 1967, accompanied by a caricature, Fedotov, called Control Panel. The big lever on the machinery, operated by the U.S. imperialist, is the quote, lever of aggression, while the sets of the switches and buttons on the panel read racism, grabbing of oil, bombings, bestialities, arsons, plundering, rapes, executions. The red arrow button has the label napalm, and the three whitewashing arcing arrows are for the mainstream media, excuses, lies, and slander. So here's the article itself. Ladies and gentlemen, all patience comes to an end. Since June 5th, I, like many other readers around the world, have been opening the morning newspapers in the hope of seeing a message that you have finally made the long awaited decision. As you can guess, I am referring to the incorporation of the State of Israel into the United States as the 51st state. However, it's been a month and a half now, and there's still no news about it. Naturally, I imagine that such a simple and natural idea as the idea of establishing the American state of Israel, especially after what has happened in the Middle East during this time, not to have visited not to have visited your bright minds. The silence of the press on this issue probably means that the issue is still being discussed informally, behind the scenes, on the sidelines, maybe even in a whisper. Such caution, I assure you, is in vain. There is nothing vague about the issue of Israel's inclusion into your states, either viewed as an internal matter of the United States or in international terms. The situation is as clear as the sky over the Sinai Desert. Let's start with geography. The territory of Israel, admittedly, is not located within the American continent, but it doesn't matter. Hawaii, for example, is an island, and moreover, it is by no means inhabited by the Anglo-Saxons. But you have included the Hawaiian Islands in the states, and you are by no means embarrassed by it. So if Israel is equated to an island, almost according to the textbook, a part of the land surrounded on all sides by the outrage of the world community, then no amount of nitpicking will find any flaw. So it's cool. This is like very sarcastic writing from the Soviet Union in like 1967, it was, I believe it said. And it just shows that like none of this has changed. People have been making all the same kind of logical points. And in the end, it really just is about power games. And I feel like with the recent bombing of Iran, we've come to this inflection point where people have been waiting for that moment for my entire life, at least for many people's entire lives, waiting for the war between Israel and Iran, because this is again perceived as like a big inflection point. And now it's kind of left to be seen whether Russia and China will get involved to back up Iran, or whether Iran will fall, leaving the U.S. to completely control the Middle East, which then will They will then use as a jumping point to try and launch their final war of conquest against both Russia and China. So whether Iran goes like falls to the West um, leads to that next inflection point. But either way, it's all like this one seemingly inevitable path that we're on. So continuing here, let's move on to history. Israel has not yet turned 20 years old, which is quite a suitable age for adoption. And if we recall that the lively young man was fed from childhood with whole dollar milk and with fatherly tenderness, you gave him as presents long range and rapid fire toys with the label Made in USA, then of course there will be no misconceptions about the legality of such an adoption. Let's take the economic side now. With due diligence, and such diligence has just been revealed to the world in the form of treacherous and bandit aggression against the Arab states, Israel can well count on a full time position as a guard dog of your oil monopolies, on a permanent payroll, so to speak. The game is worth the candle, after all. There is something to guard in the Near and Middle East. The United States now controls more than half of all oil production in the area, and mind you, if the cost of producing 1 barrel of oil in the United States is $1.50, then say in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait, it is only 10 cents. The Black Oil River annually spills billions of dollars into the vaults of American banks. However, if such arithmetic is adored on the banks of the East River and Potomac, then it is not at all in the high esteem near the Nile and Euphrates. Therefore, following the line of thought, quote, so that something bad would not happen, it is absolutely useful to get a full time guard dog. Yeah, I mean, another thing that people I don't think really understand is that the U.S. expected Israel to control uh, Iraq after like that whole war that they waged on it, and they expected Israel to just be like a self-sustaining colony by stealing oil from other countries. And when that didn't happen, when it didn't pan out the way that they wanted, it kind of resulted in like the situation we're seeing today, which is like Israel trying even harder to expand. And again, talking about like pushing inflection points, uh, the fact that October 7th was committed by like such a small band of actors in retrospect, and then it prompted the the Israel response, like the empire's response of the Hannibal Directive. It's like none of this would be possible if it weren't for the empire's consistent violent overreaction to every response that then reveals the true nature of that. And it can be provoked by a small act like those people on October 7th, but then yeah, it's like the World War III that has now spawned as a result proves that like they were effective in their goal of trying to expose the true nature of Israel and the US empire. So back to the text here. I will not even mention such small things as the economy of Israel itself. You should be well aware that in the offices of quote Ampal Bank and Ampal American Israel Corporation, which have taken over even all of Israel's foreign trade, they are talking in the purest Wall Street jargon. Then there are customs and mores. As you know, from the very first days of the robberies against the Arab countries, the Israeli soldiers earned themselves on the pages of the world press comparisons with Hitler's murderers. However, upon closer inspection, it turned out that General Diane's army imitates to an even greater extent the American thugs in Vietnam. Yeah, it's also ironic that like even in much of the anti-Zionist discourse that happens in the West, people are still making the mistake of like using Hitler and the Nazis as the biggest, baddest demons when they even admitted they learned it all from Americans. And again, it just shows like the bias of the Western mind. Like they don't think that the progenitors of fascism who taught the Nazis are worse than the Nazis because the Nazis are external. Same atrocities against prisoners, the same methods of exterminating civilians, and napalm of the same brand. And by the way, as for Diane himself, let me just quote the flattering assessment given to the general by one of your people. I am referring to the phrase, quote, we should have asked Diane to lead operations in Vietnam, spoken according to the Paris Express by one of the admiring American paramilitary parliamentarians. Therefore, everything seems to be clear on this issue. So I repeat, from a purely American, so to speak, domestic point of view, the issue of Israel's inclusion into the United States would be solved without much difficulty. Ladies and gentlemen, what can we say about the international aspect of this issue? Perhaps you are afraid of an unfavorable resonance, and only this prevents you from solving it promptly and in a business-like manner. I undertake to prove that these concerns are at least not serious. I understand, of course, that the role of a quote neutral observer in the Arab Israeli conflict, an innocent role which Washington diligently acted out from the first minutes of the Israeli blitzkrieg, would somehow not fit in with the decision to include Israel into the United States. But thank God, everything is much simpler. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that the historical stage is not at all a hall for a frivolous school masquerade, and the real main characters are often discovered on this stage the sooner they try to play the role of extras. Hmm. Therefore, you should not flaunt a ridiculous quote neutral tailcoat. After all, it was your guys who trained Moshe Dayan in South Vietnam, after which, by the way, Israeli Prime Minister Eshkol announced with emotion, quote, "The United States is providing us with more weapons now than at any time in recent years. It was you who spent $1.5 billion on Israel's extensive preparation for robbery. It was your Patton and Sherman tanks that rushed across Arab soil at dawn on June 5th. It was your Skyhawk bombers that killed children and razed villages to the ground." Yeah, and you'll see that today still. People are trying to do this whole, oh, it's Netanyahu's war. Like people all the way up to Bernie Sanders are like just blaming all of this on one guy. They're trying to make Netanyahu the Hitler of this genocide. And the US is fully complicit. Those people themselves are fully complicit, and they have been the entire time. And people are just going to like seemingly let them get away with scapegoating this one guy. But the weapons have always come from the US. However, you probably want to say that all this is just circumstantial evidence. In that case, let me remind you of the reports that have been circulated in the world press. For example, quote, "The United States pushed Israel to resort to weapons. Nouvelle Observatoire, France." Quote, several proposed options for operations have been developed based on the results of research requested from the NATO Operational Intelligence Service, Express, France. Quote, "American Israel cooperation in the aggression unleashed by Israel was organized and directed by the CIA. Uh, Lefteros in Cyprus." And so, ladies and gentlemen, what else can you hide? It is clear, however, that you know more details about the American origin of the Israeli aggression than the rest of the world. But the circumstance does not change the case. Namely, the inclusion of Israel in the United States would be an understandable and logical action, consolidating the touching alliance between the big and small aggressors. In conclusion, let me note the indisputable advantage of such a step, should it be taken. The gangster policy of the Israeli Dayans, forcing other uninitiated to indulge in reflections on the topic, quote, "Ah, doggy, it must be very strong," thus would have found its real author. Our age and time, ladies and gentlemen, is quite complicated. You must agree that this kind of simplification would only benefit it. Why wear a mask when everyone knows who's behind the mask? Receive and read it, crocodile. So, and then we have here a picture of the entire article surrounding the artwork there. So, link in the description if you want to see it all for yourself or read over it again. But yeah, that's just all to show that since 1967, everyone else who's not under the spell of U.S. propaganda realizes exactly that whether you attribute it to the tail wagging the dog or whatever, the like Israel is just an outpost and a colony that the U.S. uses for aggression in the Middle East to control resources. It's that simple. It's actually not very complicated. Shibble says, if this would have happened in the USSR, Benji would have resigned and killed himself for being a bad comrade. All right, so I got like 5 more minutes here. I will pick up on or start on the newest book. So let's see. I want to skip over a bunch of things. So I'm going to start on page 18, but if you want to see the cover, this is Drugs, Oil, and War by Peter Dale Scott. Now this came out, let's see, two other things listed here. I'm not sure what year this came out. It'll say it in here somewhere, but it's very much along the lines of the Gladio book. Uh, it's a very similar material here. So I'm going to skip past all the author's notes and everything, starting on page 18 with the introduction. The deep politics of U.S. interventions. In 1969 to 70, the year of the Cambodian and Kent State, the year of Cambodia and Kent State, I wrote a book, The War Conspiracy. In it, I described what I considered hidden, undiscussed forces that helped lead the United States into the Vietnam War. My book looked behind official U.S. policy statements to other, more powerful factors not generally recognized, and some of my friends considered this approach pessimistic. It was not. It was optimistic, inspired by the old-fashioned hope that a better understanding of these factors might help contribute to bringing them under control. As I explored instances of hidden manipulations, whether at the highest or subordinate levels, I coined a term, parapolitics, to cover the conduct of public affairs by indirection, collusion, and deceit. But parapolitics does not cover the full range of events in this book. Parapolitics describes intentional controlling behavior, mostly executive and bureaucratic. My later chapters looked more at societal factors outside government that did not fit the definition, notably the lobbying and other activities of oil companies and the aircraft industry, often in conjunction with the military. The last two chapters dealt with matters of relevance to U.S. interventions today, the impact on U.S. foreign policy of oil strategies and the drug traffic. Yeah, so very much in line with like what we've been talking about with the Gladio book. Um, this is all going to be very familiar stuff, or at least should be more familiar to anyone if you've been hearing me read through that. So, and also, Peter Dale Scott is credited. Obviously, he invented this term parapolitics, but now you have this whole subset. It's like a whole subculture of like the anointed left and these people who are like mostly just into this aspect of imperialism, like because it's the most salacious stuff. It's like the stuff with all the CIA ops, the heart attack guns, the drug trade, like the creation of all that stuff that I'm outlining in the Gladio book, and the intelligence agencies and the culture that spawned from that. Uh, but again, like my patience runs thin for people whose entire interest in this is to just tell people about the bad things and make some money, but then never tell people about the successful examples and ways in which systems like that have been overthrown and replaced with better ones. Which is why I'm not just sticking with like the Gladio shit and the parapolitics. Like the Western Marxism book is arguably the most important one that I'm reading through right now. So I'm hoping to be able to find something else to substitute that with, or to like something similar to replace that with once I'm finished with it. But yeah, that's what I'm really hoping to get across to people is that like not only is the situation worse than you think, but rather than just make people miserable and just like stuck in a doom loop of how bad things are, and then again siphon money from them while they're doing that, I would like people to find some positive examples. Like there are good examples that people can learn from. It's very important. So back to the text here. Today I would speak of quote deep politics or deep political processes rather than conspiratorial events, meaning a series of practices at odds with the laws and mores of society, quote, which are usually repressed rather than acknowledged. Deep political processes include parapolitical ones, but are more open-ended. Parapolitics is a means of control. Deep politics can refer to any form of sinister, unacknowledged influence. The distinction, easy enough to make in theory, is much harder to make in practice. Some of the bureaucratic manipulations described in this book, such as those involving Air America and Laos, strike me as parapolitical intrigue. But underlying Southeast Asian history in these years was the politically significant narcotics traffic. The CIA was intimately connected to this traffic, chiefly through its proprietary Air America, but it was not securely in control of this traffic and probably did not even seek to be. What it desired was, quote, deniability, achieved by the legal nicety that Air America, which the CIA wholly owned, was a corporation that hired pilots and owned an aircraft maintenance facility on Taiwan. Hmm. Another another weird coincidence that the U.S. has all these interests in Taiwan that they can use for all these nefarious operations. What a legacy. Most of its planes, which often carried drugs, were 60% owned and frequently operated by Kuomintang KMT Chinese. So yeah, the U.S. started with its colony in Taiwan by accepting the premise that these people who lost the Civil War, or quite literally the Confederates, like the slaveholders of the Chinese Civil War equivalent, fled to this island, took refuge there, and have only been able to do so for this long because the United States has been helping them. And even the actual citizens of Taiwan want reunification overwhelmingly with China uh, through the peaceful like process that the Chinese government has outlined, and they're only being prevented from doing so because Taiwan is such a useful outpost and colony of U.S. aggression against China. It's the whole thing. Again, not too hard to understand unless you're not a Marxist and you're committed to not understanding it. Schivel says, the Soviets expected it, bro. And who is Annie Louise Strong? I'm about at an hour for the day, so I've for sure run out of my voice cancellation software use for the day. I get an hour of that, and that's usually pretty helpful. Sorry, now I just realized I wasn't sharing to the correct tab, but for anybody in the video who wants to see the cover of the Peter Dale Scott book, it's Drugs, Oil, and War. So we've got this cool American soldier with an oil derricks in the background and poppy fields in the foreground. Yep, very good imagery. So I'm going to bookmark that one here. Just getting started on that one. And I will pick up again most likely tomorrow. All right, thanks again for joining, everyone. I will... the next book, Andy Lee Strong. I'll have to check that out. Send me a link after this. All right, see you, folks. Thank you all for joining. Oh, it's called that. Okay. Soviets expected it by Annie Lee.